the discouragement and the grieving in the morning is
Yeah.
sometimes supposed to be there to teach us about how frail we are.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Rough Cut Faith.
This is like the weirdest
You,
intros.
you okay?
Yeah, I'm
You
good.
All right, cool,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, we'll keep going.
Yeah.
Keep going. We are back again for discussion of what's not in the Bible.
I thought it was, hey, that's not in the Bible this week.
I wasn't as enthusiastic this week. I don't know why. I think I've been more enthusiastic.
I am
other
terribly
weeks.
disappointed
Yeah,
right
I'm
now.
sorry. You were enthusiastic though. So
I
that's
made
good.
up for your
For my lack of enthusiasm.
Yeah. Well, that defines us.
that has been our relationship for 20 years.
Somebody pops in for the first time. It's like, what in the
What
world?
is this?
Yeah, it's all right. It's fine.
So this week is kind of a folksy idiom.
Oh,
I think it's
shucks.
I picture it as something that like a great aunt would say when I was
Really?
disappointed as a teenager.
Yeah.
That's the type of context that I have for this.
See, I think of like maybe like 60-year-old 60-year-old girls.
Yeah.
Mostly because it's a phrase that like was used in The Sound of Music, and I had 5 older sisters, so it puts that genre right around that era.
Yeah.
You know.
So it's been around that long.
It's been around like since the 60s, at least.
Which is, probably longer. A lot of the things that we've talked about in the series have been around longer.
Yeah.
But this one, the folksy wisdom that comes with age, apparently, is that when God closes a door, he opens a window.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a very small window.
There's actually to be shoved through it, drugged through it by your ankles sometimes.
You're going through the window.
Going through the window. So I know that it was made into a song because I remember hearing it and feeling like, latent rage rising up into me because it was such a sappy song. It was
really?
It wasn't anyone popular or anything.
Wow.
I just remember hearing it. And I don't remember anything else about the song other than that was in the chorus, and it was really long and drawn out, and it's supposed to be inspiring, but it just inspired rage. So for one thing, logistically speaking, it doesn't make sense to close a door and then open a window.
Yeah.
Like another window and
Just
another
gonna breathe
part of the
fresher
house.
inside of the trapped
Yeah,
area.
yeah. Is the window like big enough that you can look out it and see what could have been? Or are you supposed to crawl through the window? I don't know.
I don't know.
Is.
I think it's rooted in the hope of like trusting God, right? Like the good side of it is,
yeah.
You know,
let's put a positive spin.
The good intentions of that phrase is that we can trust God's sovereignty.
Yeah.
That He's good. That that our circumstances aren't overwhelming, and it may not look like an opportunity, but God's still got this, right? That's the.
Yeah. I think it's usually in the context that I've heard it, either said to me or said to others, is like when great disappointment has happened, or a pursuit has failed, or there's been one roadblock after another, or whatever it is. Usually you move in a direction, something gets difficult.
Sure.
You're disappointed, or you're discouraged, or you're frustrated. And some well-meaning person comes along to encourage you and says, "Oh, but when God closes a door, He opens a window."
Yeah, it's the count it all joy of opportunities.
Yeah.
It's boy, I tell you, I have a hard time in the sense of like, well, what about patient endurance and suffering? Some of those things that come out.
Is there a positive to it? Like, where would it come from, and why would we say it? Why would we adopt it rather than saying something that actually isn't scripture?
Well, I mean, in that positive sense, it is rooted in this idea that we can trust God. Even if our circumstances aren't good, we can trust that God is doing something. It's like Joseph's story. What your brothers intended for evil, I intended for good, right? So there's that kind of stuff that's there. It also kind of like shifts your mindset from just sulking in the closed door itself. So I go like, okay, so there's maybe some semi-positive intentions
I
around
think
it.
it's well intended.
Yeah, absolutely. Where some of the things we've talked about have no good
No good
intention
intentions
whatsoever.
at all.
Whatsoever. It's just there to make you feel guilty and like you're a
Terrible.
horrible person
Or
for
may-
not actually like,
or somebody's making money off of you.
or yeah, or somebody is. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is not necessarily an
No.
ill intent. It's just a misplaced
Yeah.
attempted encouraging.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to do
Yeah.
it. I mean, most of the ways that when you're pretty discouraged about something not working out, it's it you do sometimes need that motivation to start looking for what is the next step, right? And so in that sense, I mean, I'm not going to throw this one under the bus of like complete and total garbage, but I would say it definitely, like everything in this series, there's nuance that it can have more negative effects for us.
I think at best it's an attempt to encourage.
Yes.
But it's not helpful.
Yeah.
At worst, it's a misplaced understanding of what God's sovereignty is.
Sure. Yeah. And suffering or disappointment and or
so
ad nauseum.
The first question that I have in looking at it, kind of like pulling it apart a little bit, is, does God close doors? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
And I feel like, for me, I look at the concept of sovereignty is like a king. That would be, at least when it's talked about in the New Testament, the Caesar, the king of Rome, the Caesar of Rome, had sovereignty. That would have been the understanding. Or the king of that region had some sovereignty, but then he would have had to defer to the Caesar. But anyway, without getting into the political structure of Rome.
Sure, I appreciate that.
Sovereignty.
It's early, Michael.
Yeah. Sovereignty was an ideal. It wasn't necessarily a reality.
Yeah.
So it didn't mean control. The sovereign, the king who is sovereign, has a say in how everything should happen. But there's still thieves. There's still murders. There's still people who rebelled against the king. So the fact that the king was sovereign doesn't mean that he controlled every element of every aspect of society.
Down to the very minutia, and didn't allow anything to step outside of his will.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a good thing to you have to wrestle with.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, myself included, we grew up with this, when God's sovereignty was spoken of, it was spoken of in more of the understanding of, well, this is God is sovereign, therefore God orchestrates, understands, and does everything. So even the evil that goes on in the world is still orchestrated by God. As opposed to an understanding of sovereignty as you described it, where a king has a will, there are rules, there are laws, and there are rule and law breakers. It doesn't mean that the king is initiating that type of stuff. It just means that this is his desired will for the way the world functions.
Yeah.
And you've got to wrestle through that. If you have a different view of understanding of sovereignty, you've got to wrestle through that.
Yeah.
And so a view of the sovereignty of God that believes God is just shutting the doors for everything, which you could say, hey, like Paul was praying and wanting, during his missionary journeys, wanting to go to an area, and the Spirit kept closing the doors for them to do that. So you could go, well, listen, but God sometimes blocks, prevents, because he's got something else that he is, working his plan in his ways and his time. But to say that is everything, versus God can move in and through and in spite of the rebellions that go on underneath his sovereign rule, that was hard to process for a long time.
This is how I'm still processing.
Thank you. I'm glad
Yeah.
because so am I.
Here, here's my rough cut thoughts on
Oh
that.
boy.
And this is one of the reasons I
Pay
did.
attention, friends. Put a
Yeah.
quarter in the slot. We'll see how it goes.
This is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this phrase,
Sure.
because I think it enters into that idea of what is God's sovereignty.
Sure.
So how I've reconciled this is that God is, as any sovereign, as any king or any ruler is sovereign, you have the choice
Yes.
as an individual to bring your will into alignment with the will of the sovereign.
Yeah.
And when you say, I will accept your sovereignty, I will accept your rule, I want to live under the sovereignty of this one ruler.
Yeah.
And therefore, I need to look at what is their will. What do they want to have done? And I'm going to live according to that.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's like assenting to their sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that their sovereignty is not threatened by rebellion.
Yeah.
The sovereign remains that. That's just a state of being.
Yeah.
The rebellion just fails to assent to the sovereignty.
Yeah.
And says, I will not accept this.
Yeah.
I will live outside of the sovereignty of this person or this ruler.
Mm-hmm.
And there's consequences then for that.
Yeah.
Like if you're breaking laws that the ruler has put in place, then he says, here are the consequences for this law. And you who choose to rebel against that, who are not willing to accept the rule of the sovereign, then you'll have those consequences. But that's still free will.
Yeah.
You are freely able to walk away from the sovereign rule.
Mm-hmm.
You will just be breaking those laws, and there will be consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that sense, God is in control of the ones who have assented to his sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
But when Jesus was here, on multiple occasions, he said that he's not in control here. He said that there's the principalities, Paul said, the principalities and powers of the air,
Mm-hmm.
the rulers of this age.
Yeah.
Jesus said that even on when he was arrested at Gethsemane, he said the rulers of this age are coming.
Yeah.
Like he's saying that if he wanted to take power
Mm-hmm.
and control, he could.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a ruler of this age.
Yeah.
And in that way, I believe that when we come to an idiom like God closes a door, when he closes a door, he opens a window.
Mm-hmm.
The closing of the door is, God, I want your will to be done, not my will. And so as I move forward in life, if this is not your will,
Mm-hmm.
then you'll move me. You'll stop this from happening or guide me in a different direction. And I think that's where I'm dovetailing with what you brought up with Paul. That's where I see that working out, was Paul wanted to do God's will. Mm-hmm. He accepted the sovereignty of God in his life as the ruler of his life. And he said, I think we should go here. I'm going to keep moving in this direction.
Sure.
Things didn't work out. It just kept stopping. And I think that was Paul eventually going, I don't think God wants us to move in this direction.
Yeah.
But it wasn't God's will fighting Paul's will. Yeah. It was Paul saying, I want to do God's will, and I'm trying to figure out what that looks like.
I think in that sense, a lot of times the mindset of the phrase, one of the risky parts about it is that, as you described it, like when the door is closed, the assumption is that it's going to happen instantly, that there's another way to go. Mm-hmm. And so like in some ways it rushes and forces the hand to go, oh, well, so like for Paul moving through everything, well, this doesn't seem like the way we should go. Well, like what's the next, like, let's go. And then for somebody like today, well, I really thought this was the person I was supposed to marry. Oh, it didn't work out. Well, who's the next one? Right? Yeah. Or, oh no, I'm supposed to be a celibate missionary in another part of the world. Like, so I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna go do this and this. Like, right? I think it can, in an unhealthy way, put a false sense of expectation on God's plan and God's will for us, that means we feel like, oh, we got to get this done.
Yeah.
Like there's something we got to do. The door's not open. Well, where we got to go? Like, and so it undermines the ability to be patient, to wait, and to deal with disappointment and suffering, which that's, I think, probably the human toll of that is that if you have this mindset of God closes a door, he opens a window, you're never able to process loss.
You have to sit in that room with the closed door for a real long time.
Yeah. And it's and so to be like, well, if your mindset goes, well, the door's closed, well, where's the window? You're not able to focus on, well, that was really disappointing.
Yeah.
That really hurt. And so then you end up with people down the road, because they went through the window, dealing with the fact that, they were really sad and disappointed and hurt at the fact that the door was closed.
Yeah.
And it usually doesn't show up in convenient times of joy and all kinds of stuff. It pops up down the road when somebody's, in a place of tension with something. And so it's like, I think I've gotten to a spot where I think the human process of healing and dealing with loss or disappointment or grief is more complicated than we think it is. And so the easy thing to do is to just avoid the discomfort and move forward.
Which I think that's what saying something like that is attempting to do. It's you're grieving, like as somebody who comes alongside of another person says it, it's like you're grieving, you're disappointed, you're hurting right now.
Don't worry, God's open.
Don't worry, there's a window that'll be open. Like, so stop the grieving, stop the mourning, stop the frustration, stop the bad feelings, and start looking for what the window is. Start looking for the next thing.
What's the escape?
Yeah.
And I think that's always the nuance, danger, or risk in any like catchphrase type of thing that we have in faith. There's always, I think there's always good intentions, but we don't necessarily think of the ripple effects of the long-term like impact on somebody's faith or health or even just mental or emotional well-being. And that's I think that's, as I think through it, that's the stuff that would concern me most about that kind of a phrase is what's the unspoken misunderstanding of how God wants us to process loss or grief? Is it just that we have to be robots and keep moving and chasing other things if we lose out, or does God understand our frailty, and does he invite us into the patient endurance of suffering? And then when the time is right, I do believe, like, it's not the circumstances I trust in, it's not the opportunities I trust in, it's that God is with me and that he is worthy of my trust, whatever it is that I'm going through. So, hey, when God closes the door, you can still trust him,
Yeah. And I think that I want to riff on something that you just said briefly, that God understands our frailty. And I don't think we do. And I think that sometimes there are circumstances that happen, whether it's our own making or God stopping it or whatever brought it about, the discouragement and the grieving and the mourning is sometimes supposed to be there to teach us about how frail we are. And to sit with that, we don't want to do that. Like, it's a lot easier to distract ourselves by pushing through in some other endeavor. It's easier to do that than to sit with the frailty, the ego that was just broken. And to just have to be there and look for God, trust that God will lift us up from that space.
Yeah.
So God isn't, I don't feel like God is as concerned about our endeavors as he is about our hearts.
Yes.
And so when these things happen, it has more to do with what is going on internally. How am I responding to this? How do I respond to disappointment, discouragement? What pushes me to say, okay, God, what are you trying to teach me here? And we miss all of that.
Yeah.
But that frailty that you said really sticks in my head as we think that we so often think we're stronger than we are. We think we're more mature than we are. We think that we know more than we do. We're wiser than we are.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many things that we give ourselves credit for that discouragement or failure will bring all of that back to, maybe I don't know this. Maybe I am weaker than I thought.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's a lot of vulnerability in the process.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think the other thing is you were describing what you were talking about, the other thought that kind of popped into my head is that it does twist our understanding of like our role in God's will. Like, because a lot of times folks will have this idea of, well, there's something big I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
I got to get this done. And so you consider that the
big
door.
Idea, this big dream, this big passion.
Yeah. And so then it's like, well, that door was closed to me. So where's the next thing that I'm supposed to do? Where's the next door? Where's the next window that I'm supposed to go through? Because that wasn't it. So God must very clearly have something else for me to do that is big or is significant. I don't know that that's a healthy mindset either.
Yeah.
Because in the frailty of things, sometimes we overestimate. Sometimes we get into a place where we just keep chasing rather than learning to appreciate and be in God's presence and be shaped, like in the small, simple moments of life.
Well, it's kind of what we talked about yesterday when we did the morning reflection on that God's will is in the daily routines, like how we live our life in the daily mundaneness of life, how we are kind to each other, how we can rejoice in and see the value and worth in another person, how we seek to meet a need. Doesn't have to be a big thing. We're not building a house for somebody.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just need someone to talk to.
Yeah.
There are these ways in Scripture that we can see, even through the epistles and in the Gospels. We see like all of these people in church, as the church, walking through life, just doing what needs to be done in a normal, everyday way.
Yeah.
And those are not big projects.
No.
Those are not huge endeavors.
No, it's seeking God's, it's not seeking the next opportunity or the next window. It's seeking God's presence in the moments.
Yeah.
And that's I think, if somebody has that mindset that, well, if God closes the door, he's going to open, well, maybe, but you can trust God no matter what's going on in your circumstances.
Yep.
And it's not so much about the opportunities as being attuned and connected to the Spirit in the moment by moment parts of your day.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing when I think through that phrase that I would say concerns me most, if that's like something that somebody's latched onto, is that it just puts your head like over here, and you're never able to dwell within your own skin.
Yeah.
You know,
you're not processing anything.
No, you're who you are is based on what you're accomplishing.
Yeah.
Rather than the transformation of your character, rather than the connectedness of your soul with God's. It's related to, what am I doing?
Yeah.
What am I doing? What am I doing? And I think that's, that's the tension I feel in that kind of a phrase, because I do think there are some days that we get that big idea in our head, and so that's the stuff we chase.
Yeah.
And then when it closes, you almost become incapacitated, and I don't think that's helpful.
Yeah.
Right? That's not.
Well, that becomes part of your identity as this pursuit is my identity.
Yeah.
And if God closes the door, what's he doing? Who am I? Where am I?
I'm a high
happening?
capacity, individual leader, whatever it is, and I've got a growth mindset, and like you hear all the buzzwords going on, and so all of a sudden it's like, well, you hit a wall, and and I don't want to throw rocks, because the amount of times people told me I was too stubborn when we planted the church because we didn't give up, It's like there's doors, they keep closing, and we're like, nope, this is this is where we're at. And so I don't want to throw stones in that sense, but I also want us to be people that are super conscientious of why we do it.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of the things that we're pursuing, and are we pursuing those things to the detriment, but ignoring what's going on? Are we ignoring loss? Are we ignoring grief? Are we shortchanging the healing process, and or allowing or shortchanging the opportunity for us to be in God's presence and to trust Him no matter what's going on, because we just got to get the next thing done. And that just is concerning to me.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like if you believe, and that's a good example of planting a church, if you believe that God has called you to do something, it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
It's not always.
Yeah.
But most of the time,
yeah,
it's going to be difficult. And that's the other aspect of this phrase that I think is detrimental to us.
Yeah.
Is that when we come across difficulties, setbacks, or frustrations, we suddenly start going, is that God closing the door?
Yeah.
No, it's just really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just, if you're going to do something good, this world doesn't like that.
Yeah.
Like there's
anything worthwhile is
right.
Wait, yeah.
It's and I mean, this is a very specific case. I'm not talking about just everyday life.
Yeah.
But if you're
that can feel hard too some days.
Well, yeah, that's difficult too. That's not to say it's not. But when you come across, I know that I've struggled with this in my own life.
Yeah.
And I've talked to people who have. No matter what the endeavor is, whether it's raising kids or buying a house or fixing a house or starting a church or doing something, on a bigger scale, you hit points that are difficult.
Yeah.
And when things are really hard, it's almost like the assumption is, well, God must be shifting or closing the door, or maybe it's not God's will.
Yeah.
And I think that in a subtle way reveals the mindset that if I'm doing this for the Lord, then it's going to be easy.
Yeah,
it's going to be.
If it's not easy, then maybe God's not in it.
Yeah, or I'm out of God's will. If it's not easy, then I'm out of God's will.
Yeah.
And I think that mindset is really damaging and stops us from moving towards anything difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So if you were gonna, if somebody uses that phrase, okay, when God closes a door, He opens another window, what would you say is more of a response or a way to reframe some of the positive sides of things with an awareness of the negatives? How would you rephrase that into more of a biblical framework within, kind of your mindset?
I think it would be hard to rephrase it.
Sure.
That's
why I said reframe the concept.
I think I would say, if somebody said that to me and I was discouraged, I would say, well, I'm sitting for a while in this and finding out what it's going to look like to move forward.
Yeah.
Just processing the disappointment.
Yeah.
Or the discouragement, looking at the difficulties.
Yeah.
And then seeking out what what does the next step look like?
Yeah.
Because,
do you continue forward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this just because it's difficult?
Sure.
Or do we need to shift and do something different?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a hard
Yeah.
it's a hard one to push back on.
Yeah.
Because I do recognize people are trying to be encouraging.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't want to just say, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
God just decided to shut me down.
Yeah.
I don't think that's how God
Yeah.
works, or the condition that we're in.
Yeah, I think if we could adopt that mindset that says, well, no matter what my circumstances are, I can trust that God is with me.
Yeah.
And that I can trust Him.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me at least, that's what I would hope to walk out of. If somebody was like, hey, God closes a door, maybe he opens a window for you.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, maybe, but the reality is no matter what I'm facing, I know God's with me and I can trust Him.
Yeah.
And I think that's what then I would lean into what you said of, I'm just, to be honest, I'm just really disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
This is hard, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
frustration and disappointment here, and I need to process that so that I can move forward in a greater sense of trust.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately that's what we want to grow in our ability to trust God and in our ability to be obedient to Him. And so that may at times mean understanding the suffering and moving through it, not just ignoring it or sweeping it under a rug.
So as we kind of come in for a landing here, I'd like to not a crash landing. I'd like to talk a little bit about what processing that looks like.
Sure.
Because if we're not just going to go to easy cliches, to find encouragement of some sort, what do we go to? How do we process a door being closed?
Yeah. How do you process disappointment? Mm-hmm. Well, so couple of different situations come to mind in my life. One is I have to remind myself of. So there was an opportunity that I had to go and work with my mentor as a young man, and I remember that he called and just asked if I would come and serve with him at his church, and I was like thrilled about that. And I said, well, I just signed a contract at a ministry that I was a part of, and it was a full year, and so I knew that I would have to get out of that in order to go be a part of what he had asked me to do. And so I went and I asked. I said, hey, I have an opportunity that I've wanted to do for years, and I would really like to do that. But in order for that to happen, I'd like you to release me from my contract. And my boss was like, no, I really want you to honor your contract. And man, I was frustrated. I was so disappointed and heartbroken because, I mean, sure, did I think I was going to enjoy that experience when I said, yeah, I'll do that, or I thought it was a good step? Yeah, absolutely, but I didn't know all the information that was there. And I had to go, okay, well, what do I know? Okay, well, God, I know God wants me to be a person that honors my word, right? And is it a bad thing for me to stay? No. Is it a wrong thing for me to say? No. Am I going to be sad that I missed on an opportunity to work for and under Dave's leadership? Yeah. But who, I had to make that decision and think through, am I going to be bitter about this? Or am I going to, understand that this is the path that I'm on for right now? And I went back, I talked with Dave for a while about it and just said, they've asked me to keep my contract. And his simple answer was just, well, then you need to honor your word, because he was concerned about my character, not just like me getting what I wanted. Because he knew what I wanted to do. My boss knew what I wanted to do. And I could look back on that now and go, there's still there's loss that's there,
Yeah.
even thinking about it now, like
Right,
20
right.
years later. Because, long and the short, Dave passed away, earlier than
Yeah.
I thought he would have,
Right, right.
And so there's a sense of loss of, wow, I could have had a different relationship there. But I also can look at it and go, man, there were so many opportunities I had that year to invest in people and to grow in my capacity within organizational structures.
Yeah,
And,
yeah. And you think about where it's taken you to, because that would have changed the trajectory.
That would have
of your
totally
life.
changed.
Yeah.
I would have gone from upstate New York, where I ended up meeting my wife, to like rural Virginia.
Yeah.
I probably would have played the banjo a lot sooner if I had done that. So not saying I play it now, but I would have wanted to. So,
You
but
own one now.
I do. We're getting close,
you
right?
would have owned one right away.
Yeah.
I would have come.
I probably would have a southern accent. So, but
Yeah.
it did. The path did alter. The outcome did alter. But it could have become something that embittered me.
Yeah.
And instead, I think it was something that allowed me to see, God's character and his desire for me to grow as a person, became like my focus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think it's not easy.
Yeah.
And that's an easy one to talk about. There's plenty of ones that I wouldn't have that conversation in such a forum,
Yeah.
But the dynamics of disappointment and heartbreak and just being able to go, I know I need God in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
and I know the things that God wants for me in character and in love for him and for others. Those are things that have to be the focus, not the I feel slighted.
Yeah.
Because when you feel slighted, it's easier for that to become like slight leads to a feeling of entitlement or bitterness or whatever.
And you realize how much of yourself was imbued into that experience, and then recognizing that I need to take myself out of this.
I think that's why Scripture warns against the root of bitterness, because it grows, it gets a hold of our hearts.
Yeah.
And I can't think of much more fertile soil for bitterness than disappointment and discouragement.
Yeah, and that, I think, if we keep the view that God is the one closing these doors, then that bitterness eventually points to God. And as this,
why would he keep doing this?
Yeah, why do you keep doing this? You know how important this is. I want to do this for you.
Yeah.
And it's
it's really for me.
Yeah, but it's really for me. And every time you get angry about it, you have to recognize that anger is coming from a place of ego, of self-centeredness. That anger is coming from, you didn't let me do this. You didn't let me do the thing that I wanted to do, even though I was doing it for you. And anytime, I think that anger directed at God in that way, because of disappointment, just reveals so much about how much we were hoping to get from it. And that's a hard thing to sit with. But I think a better way to view it is that if there are things that we're not pushing through, if we're going to say, sometimes we just say, this isn't a door closing, this is just really difficult. And I'm disappointed that it's so hard.
The door's smaller than I thought it was going to be.
It's creakier.
Turned out it was a window.
It was a wall. I didn't know. But sometimes it's hard, and you just have to determine that, okay, it's more difficult than we thought it would be. We're still going to move forward.
Sure.
But there's the other times where we have to graciously say, this is beyond me. This is beyond what I'm capable of or what we can do, or it's just not going to work. It's going to be more harmful for me and for others if we keep pushing. And to sit with that, in the disappointment of that, but also to say, okay, if God is sovereign in my life, and I have desired to align my will with God's will, then it's not over. Life isn't over. There's going to be another pursuit, and it may not be as big and grandiose and bring me as much joy or as much self-aggrandizement as I wanted. But I think about Henry Nouwen's concept of, what do you call it, downward mobility. It's as a counter to the upward mobility concepts in the 80s and 90s that you just have to keep moving up. And Nouwen was like, no, I keep moving, I keep getting lower. Like he was somebody that taught at most of the prestigious universities and in one form or another all over the country, and wrote tons of books, was a sought after speaker, and spent like the last 20 years of his life as the chaplain for an organization that cared for people who were mentally handicapped. And that was his world. So the disappointment, at least for me, the disappointment that I've found has often come from me thinking that this was going to be a bigger deal than it was, or bring more fulfillment than it did, or it would. And I think that I've been learning to just pull back and say, you know what, I can't keep pursuing this because it's all about me then. And the doors that are closing or whatever that looks like, if I'm not going to keep pushing through, I have to recognize that God must have some other thing for me to do. And that could be just as simple as caring for people around me. It doesn't have to be a big deal. And it doesn't have to bring me anything more than just a willingness to do that.
That's good stuff.
It's a good place to wrap up.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's been nice to have this conversation with you.
Listening in on it.
The listener. If you have anything that you'd like us to talk about, or any questions, or require any more explanation, please leave a message. You can go to discoverthegrove.com and fill out a contact form there, or you can leave a note on the YouTube page. That would be fine too.
Awesome.
We will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.